You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramee.
Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Scuderia F1, the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One racing. My name is Mark Dailey, I'm your host, and as always I'm joined by Kevin Laramee. Formula One is back, we're back, and we're into, I guess they have a stretch run in Formula One. I guess we could call this the stretch run. I don't think it's necessarily limited to baseball, is it?
Well, 7 Grand Prix in 10 weekends, I would call that a stretch run.
Yeah, well, I was just kind of thinking how nice it was to have those 3 weeks off with the summer break here. And although, I mean, we were obviously busy doing other things, yourself and
there was
Dwayne,
a little
very busy. Yeah,
a little tournament of sports called the Olympics that took a little bit of our time, but outside of that, it was quite quiet.
Definitely, but it is nice to get back and start talking about Formula One again. And yeah, it was basically more of the same. There was some Mercedes dominance, some Ferrari disappointment, and Max Verstappen doing Max Verstappen things this past weekend at the Belgian Grand Prix.
Shocker, a Mercedes won. Verstappen stopped Kimi from passing. 2 things that we're getting quite used to seeing in 2016.
Definitely. But what was that before the race that Lewis Hamilton incurred a 60 grid penalty for changing his power units after each and every practice session?
Everything. They literally changed the gearbox, the engine, the intercooler, the turbocharger. They literally changed everything they could because the penalties don't carry over. So might as well take the blunt of it and still finish on the podium.
That is absolutely incredible. But when you think about it, he was helped by that safety car to a certain degree. But I mean, he had a phenomenal opening lap, as did Fernando Alonso. And then having to go behind the safety car at about lap 5 or 6 or whatever it was when Kevin Magnussen crashed at the top of Eau Rouge and went into the tire barrier there.
So hard.
That just closed everything up nicely. And I think that worked out rather well for Mr. Hamilton, and I think that Nico Rosberg was probably quite shocked. Well, I know for a fact he was quite shocked that Hamilton ended up finishing in 3rd place because he said so after the race, but it was quite, I would say, almost a Sunday drive for Nico Rosberg. He was never really challenged by anybody once the race got underway.
Well, he got lucky because in the first turn, he was at the exact perfect position not to get rammed in by the movement of Verstappen to Sebastian to Kimi. So he was not involved in that first corner touch. So he was already clear in front and was able to coast to victory eventually. But you mentioned the stopping of the red flag, stopping of the race, the safety car. You know, it was very bad timing for like 3 or 4 cars that pitted the lap before. So they're like, damn it, we pitted, we lost like 20 seconds, like 10th position, and now we're not going to get them back because everybody's going to pit, and we're just stuck in that timing of pitting, and we have to pit again to make sure that we're in the same level as everybody else. So it's a shame for those drivers, but like you mentioned, for Hamilton, it gave him a chance to get closer and to be just pass everybody because his car was way better. They set up the car for him to be able to pass in traffic compared to Nico, who set up to fly alone in front. He did not have a good qualifying car. He did not even barely try to qualify. The car was set up for the race, and it showed because he was able to be fast in traffic and overtake better than usually in a Mercedes because the Mercedes wasn't built for traffic. They were able to modify it correctly for this race for him to achieve a podium starting last from the grid. And it's a shame that we didn't see all those movements on camera because it was in the back of the cars. But it was a spectacular race for Hamilton.
It was, and it couldn't have worked out any better for him because I think obviously they decided to bite the bullet, change all the parts that they needed to on the car, and just take the penalties. And if they got anything out of that race, that would just have been a bonus if they could have gotten any results, and then just minimize the impact that Nico Rosberg would eat away into Hamilton's lead in the driver's standings. And I think obviously that you couldn't get much better than third. He was, I think, rightfully very happy at that result, because he's still 10 points ahead of Nico Rosberg in the standings right now. And, well, with still quite a few races to go, I would think it's still advantage Hamilton. But if you're Nico Rosberg, I think you must be a little bit frustrated and a little bit disappointed, because, to a certain degree anyways, because you did everything right. You qualified in pole position, and he had a good start for once, because the last couple of races in Hungary and Germany, he just didn't get off the line well, and he didn't put a wheel wrong in the entire race, and he still was not able to really make much. Well, he made some of an impact in the lead that Hamilton had,
a little
that
bit
he
of
pulled
points,
away before the summer break, but still, that must be quite frustrating for Nico.
Only 9 points is the difference between Hamilton and Rosberg in the championship. But for Hamilton, he was able to bite the bullet, and it was like on the calendar, they scratched off this weekend, because they thought, we're going to take big penalties. We're going to start from the back, and we'll see what we get from it. The podium is almost unexpected. They figured a top 10, even top 5 would be very possible with those amount of points. But a podium finish, and even if that race would have been a little longer, he would not have caught up Rosberg. But he would have caught up maybe Ricardo, so that would have been possible. So for Hamilton, the performance that he made in this Grand Prix shows that he has the championship credentials that we all see in him, and we've seen over the years. He's the winningest driver almost right now, not statistically, but if you put yourself in the future, he might be able to go challenge Schumacher's records down the year if Mercedes' dominance is continuing this way. That's not a small task to say. I just mentioned Michael Schumacher because Belgian Grand Prix, that's where he made his debut as well a long time ago. I think it's the late 80s. It would be, I think it's 92.
In 92, yeah. This past weekend was the 25th anniversary since Michael Schumacher made his debut in Formula One. And there's been a lot of comparisons drawn between Herr Schumacher and another young driver who has made quite an impact, no pun intended, in Formula One this season. And that would be Mr. Max Verstappen, who drew some headlines for all the right or all the wrong reasons, depending whether or not you're a fan of Verstappen's. But obviously, and you talked about it just a little while ago, that going into La Source at the very first turn there on the start, it was Max Verstappen that was in P2 on the grid, but he didn't have a very good start. He got off the line slowly and was passed both by Kimi Räikkönen and Sebastian Vettel, and they went into La Source, which is quite a sharp angle. I would venture to say it's obviously more than 90 degrees, but there was quite a lot of room left by Räikkönen. And obviously I think that we know with Max Verstappen now that he's going to dive and take any opportunity he can. But I thought myself personally that was a bit of a wishful passing maneuver, and he tried to come off on his stance that he was pushed off the track by the Ferraris, which I suppose he can make that argument. But if you look at it, it's Vettel, then Räikkönen, and then Verstappen. And there was no way that Vettel would have been able to see Verstappen, because he was about a third of a car length or half a car length in front of Räikkönen, and Räikkönen was about half a car length in front of Verstappen, and Verstappen's coming on a bit of an angle, and Vettel's coming across a little bit, and poor old Kimi's the one that gets squashed in the middle.
Always seems to be. It's always a nice guy who gets stuck, right? It's always a nice guy who gets
It's
stuck.
usually how it works, isn't it?
Yeah, but when you talk about Verstappen, he is showing a lot of ability to not be afraid of taking that risk, of taking that gap, going for it. But he needs to understand that you cannot win a Grand Prix in the first lap, but you can lose it. But you can lose it. And you have to choose your battle. If it was a Mercedes, you have to go try to get in front, because you're not going to be able to overtake him during the race. It was a Ferrari, though. The Ferrari, they are faster, the Red Bulls, than the Ferrari. They can play with them on the track and try to get in front of them any way possible. The first corner is not necessarily the answer for Verstappen to get himself in front of the Ferraris. Again, if it's a Mercedes, you have to get in front, otherwise you're not going to see anything but the back of their car for the entire hour and a half. You have to get in front of it by any means necessary. Any other car for Red Bulls, you can deal with it. You have to choose your battle, choose the right timing. In the first corner of a Grand Prix, it's not the best timing to go all out on a move with your car and risk getting damage on your car and on other cars.
And definitely, I totally agree with that, Kevin. I think that shows maybe the maturity of Max Verstappen as a racing driver right now. Because honestly, if I'm in a Red Bull and I'm behind a Ferrari on the racetrack, I like my chances. We've seen over the course of the year just how stronger that the Red Bulls have become, and Renault is obviously giving them a lot of power in the engines that they have. If I'm stuck behind a Ferrari now and it's a track where there are opportunities to pass, like at Spa-Francorchamps, I fancy my chances. And we saw that quite a few times when he was dicing with Kimi Räikkönen later in the race, that Räikkönen would pass him and then Verstappen would go right back and
you know
take
why?
him.
And you know why Räikkönen was passing him in the first place? Because of the damage that he had on the car because of turn 1. So
yes,
that would not have happened.
Right,
he would probably be in front of the Ferraris for the entire race once he passed him, which wasn't the case, because once he was in front of him, the Ferraris in the certain turn were able to catch up with him. Then it became straight. The Red Bull engine was faster, but because of the damage of the car of turn 1, he was not able to stay in front and finish behind Räikkönen by action in a position. Got past to the line as well. So.
Yeah, and the big thing for Verstappen was not only that did he damage the outside of his front wing, which required that to be replaced, but he also damaged the floor on his car. So that really put a damper on his day, because by the time it was all done, it was Sebastian Vettel who managed to get his way back up to 6th. Kimi Räikkönen finished in 9th, and Verstappen finished in P11. So I think in normal circumstances, you don't see a Red Bull down there with like the Haas or maybe a Williams or a McLaren, or teams of cars of those standing. But yeah, it's too bad, because when it came down to the end of the qualifying, it was Räikkönen and Verstappen who were all fairly close to Nico Rosberg, within a couple of tenths, which is a little bit closer than we've seen at times this year. Obviously, I think it might be a little bit of a stretch to suggest that maybe one of the Red Bulls or the Ferraris could have caught Nico Rosberg or pushed him for the lead, but definitely I think they really hurt themselves. And Ricciardo, who kept his nose clean, took P2 at the end of the race.
Well, when we talk about Mercedes and qualifying, especially this Saturday, when you had Lewis Hamilton not even going for it, and I don't like to say this expression, but they're playing with their advantage. Mercedes know they're in front of everybody else by a certain margin, and they can play with this. They can do buffer on the engine and all those things combined to save the engine, to save the cars, and that's what they're trying to do. That's why I believe there was a smaller difference between Rosberg and the rest in qualification, is because they were probably saving it a little bit here and there because they can. So that's a difference too. When we trying to analyze results of Mercedes with their time, we have to remember Theo Wolff is kind of like the type of manager that will take gains where he can, but he's smart about it and will trying to save cars, because he knows in the long run, for not just Lewis but for Nico as well, it will be useful down the stretch if they have those pieces together, and they're probably trying to save the engine. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's why the times were closer on Saturday.
Yeah, that is also a very good point, Kevin. I think that they're only pushing the equipment as much as they need to, because you don't need to run into a problem where you're having to change out gearboxes or risk blowing the engine or something like that, especially when there's still so much at stake and still so much to race for. There's still a third of the season, well, maybe a quarter of the season to go. Yeah. So there's still plenty of points out there on the track. But let's just go back to Max Verstappen quickly for a second. So I just wanted to talk about that later in the race. He's drawn criticism from other drivers throughout the year. Most notably, he seems to have had some run-ins with Kimi Räikkönen in the last couple of races in Hungary, and then again this past weekend in Spa, when at the end of the straightaway that Räikkönen tried to make a pass, and then Verstappen would pull out maybe once Kimi had committed himself, and Räikkönen was critical about that and says he didn't like the way that he was defending his position. And I think that's an interesting point of discussion.
Well, here, as a driver, like Blundell's mentioned on the broadcast, and other drivers have chimed in since then, as a driver, you're not supposed to defend your position. You're supposed to defend the track. That's the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to take the best position for yourself and try to make it harder without impeding your opponent on that track. So you get the inside, but not too much inside that he's going to take the outside, and you don't leave space inside for him to take. That's what supposedly you're supposed to do. You're supposed to defend your position by defending your track position and not defending where the other car is going. What Verstappen is doing, and we've seen this many times on Sunday, is he waits for the other driver to do the move, then he counters that move, but doesn't counter his track position technically, because he's just countering the move, and that can become dangerous when you talk about doing this at L'Eau Rouge at 300 kilometers per hour. And that's where it draws criticism, is look, you're playing a dangerous game here, Max, at a very high speed, and one of these days you'll play a game of chicken and somebody's just not going to give in and you're going to go flying. And that is one of the dangers that can happen when one of those moves is a wheel-to-wheel car just flies, because that's what we've seen.
And that was one of the sentiments I think that Kimi Räikkönen said himself after the race, that he fears that maybe it might be a big accident that maybe finally gets through to Verstappen. But you don't want to take too much of that edge away from Verstappen, because obviously he's a very talented driver. He's got that confidence of youth, and he's been compared to Schumacher already. And he's only just been in the big Red Bull team now for half a dozen, 7 races. I mean, the paint with his name on the side of the cockpit is still fairly fresh. So you don't want to take away the things that make Max. But I think if you're one of those people in his inner circle that maybe a quiet word here or there just to maybe just enlighten him on some certain facts before something bad happens. But he certainly is an exciting driver to watch, because he's willing to pass people where on tracks where people don't honestly expect to be passed, and that makes it enjoyable to watch a Grand Prix when he's doing things that only Max Verstappen can do.
And he stands out a lot compared to the other drivers too, because of those movement that he does on the track, and the fact that he's that young and he's that bold in his driving. Not necessarily arrogant in his driving, and I wouldn't even say dangerous, but the moves that he do on the track are bold, are definite, are clear, and that stands out from just drivers behind one another just going around a circle. We're not used to seeing guys trying and overtaking spots where they're not used to, and that's what we like to see about Max. And the comparison that were made with Michael Schumacher too is, look, that's how I'm going to drive. You better get used to it and deal with it, because that's how I am. And the fact that the commissaires are letting him race the way, when he's overboard, they told him, but when, it's racing too. The goal of the race is to be in front of the other one and to do everything in your power to get in front. So that's fun to see back in F1, is the will to overtake the other guy in front of you any means necessary. Sometimes you cross the line, but hey, that's not your job to decide it. That's the commissaire's job. So you leave it up to them, and I would probably do the same thing. Why not? You have an opportunity, take the most of it.
And so Max Verstappen is a huge cult figure in Holland right now. And just talking to friends and family and just watching and reading the news over there, it's something like 50,000 people, Verstappen fans, made the trip from Holland down to Spa-Francorchamps. Of course, it's only a couple-hour drive, so it's not really all that far to go, but we haven't really seen these crowds at Spa since the Schumacher heyday, when you get all the German Ferrari fans making the trek over to some of these different tracks, Spa being one of them, because actually being fairly close to where Schumacher grew up. But it's great to see, and it was also quite something to hear with all the fans that actually went down there for race day and for the weekends, that there were traffic jams that were tens of kilometers long and that did not move for several hours once everybody had left the circuit on Sunday afternoon. So you go from watching the high octane, the speed and all the excitement at the Grand Prix, then you get back in your car and then you don't move for 4 or 5 hours. So there's a bit of a contradiction there.
You just seen a car go by you over to 300 kph on Eau Rouge, and now you're stuck on a red light.
Yeah, try to get out of the parking lot. That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, what's fascinating too, you mentioned Verstappen and the fact that he's from Holland, but he actually grew up about 50 miles south of Spa-Francorchamps. For him, it's almost a homecoming. It's almost his home race as well. So he's a little bit disappointed with the result. 11 wasn't what he wanted, but he did put on a show.
He definitely did. And as you mentioned, yeah, he was born in Belgium and he does hold dual citizenship. So I guess that there's two different sets of fans that will claim him as their own. And then, of course, there's another Belgian driver that's waiting in the wings, and that would be Stoffel van Dorn, who is the reserve driver at McLaren. So that will be interesting to see. I think it's pretty much a given now that Jenson Button won't be back at McLaren for 2017, having just his last year on his current deal almost up. So it'll be quite interesting to see if Van Dorn gets into the car for 2017 alongside Fernando Alonso, who also had a very, very good Grand Prix on Sunday.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because Jenson Button answered to the question on Saturday morning before the qualification process. He was asked, how was your summer break? Did you do a lot of thinking, a lot of foresight? Did you have any plans figured out? He mentioned, I did a lot of thinking. I did a lot of introspection. I did a lot of decision making. And I feel at peace. So, Jensen, are you going to tell us what? No, I'm not. I'm not going to tell you. We'll see. So, that's in the air right now.
Yeah, well, I would be very surprised if he comes back to McLaren next year, and I would be surprised to a certain extent whether or not he stays in Formula One. There was some talk before the summer break that he may actually end up going to Williams, and that seems to be a fairly good fit, considering that was the team that he started his career in F1 15 or 16 years ago. But it was disappointing for him because he had an exceptionally good qualifying session, and he was out of the race within the first lap. And then Fernando Alonso, who was also at the back of the grid, we were talking about how well Hamilton did starting way back where he did.
Alonso did amazing too.
Yep. Yeah, and both of them carved their way up through the grid, and Fernando ended up finishing in 7th. So if McLaren, but if Button had finished the race in his McLaren, it would have been interesting to see whether or not they could have had another top 10, 2 cars in the top 10 again at Spa. But we will have to wait and see whether or not they can replicate any kind of form this coming weekend, when they all go down to Italy for the last stop on the European portion of the schedule this year.
You know what's interesting to me as well, Mark? You mentioned Van Dorn, that's coming probably next year. Another driver that actually started his F1 career the last weekend was Esteban Ocon with Manor. I think he is in the Renault/Mercedes development team. He has a contract with both. It's going to be interesting to see if he's with Manor next week, because with the big crash by the Renault driver that his name escapes me right now, he's probably going to be asked to drive in the Renault next Grand Prix, so that's going to be interesting. But he made his debut with Manor in F1. He actually performed better than Verline. Verline was forced to abandon in that Grand Prix, but Esteban Ocon, new F1 driver, taking the place of Arianto.
Yes, and Pascal Verline also said that this is just how quick things move in F1. It already says that he referred to his former Manor teammate, Rio Haryanto, was underrated during his first half season in F1. It's just like, wow, here today, gone tomorrow. You know, it's just it goes so quick. But yeah, it's a little bit sad. I mean, obviously he was a paid driver. He brought a lot of sponsorship money,
and his sponsorship money finished. And finished before the break. His sponsorship money finished after the last Grand Prix.
Yeah, which is a shame because he drove the first 12 races of 2016. So
here's the funny thing, though. He might be back in the Manor car next weekend because of the Renault injured driver. So that's going to be interesting to see if that happens, because he is the reserve driver of Manor anyways. So he was the third driver this weekend. So if anything happens to the other driver, he might get a wheel back, and this time might not have to pay for it.
Well, that would be quite ironic. They were saying that Kevin Magnussen has had some medical tests since his crash on Sunday at Spa-Francorchamps, but the initial results were rather positive. But of course, he'll have to undergo some more tests later in the week to make sure that things are actually okay. So he hasn't been officially cleared by the FIA yet, but we'll wait and see in a day or two whether or not he gets the green flag, the green light to race in Italy. Otherwise, it would be kind of ironic if it worked that way and Haryanto gets back into the cockpit to race for Manor again.
Croissant goes to Renault for that one race because he is the third driver for Renault, so he is the Renault reserve driver. So that would be, this is weird now. The amount of drivers that are in reserve team friends here, friends there, part team here, part team there. The guy Verline is with Mercedes. It's getting complicated just to keep track of who's with who.
And it's funny you should say that, because I remember seeing some promotional things from Mercedes. Oh, this is a couple of months ago now. I think it was at the beginning of the summer. And you see Nico and you see Lewis, and then just kind of a little bit off center, a little bit further back is Pascal Wehrlein wearing a Mercedes sweater or shirt with a big star on the chest. And it says reserve driver or something like that. It's just like, wait, like, hang on.
But he's driving with the other team.
It just looks a little bit funny. I mean, I know he's the reserve driver for Mercedes, but you get used to him driving around in that red and blue Manor F1. So things like that are a little funny.
Back in my day, what it used to be, you had two drivers and you had a reserve driver. The reserve driver was doing what? Testing at the workshop. That's what he was doing. Not driving with another team. That's kind of like kissing your sister and then you're going back to your girlfriend after. Come on, choose what you want. Decide and, go all in with Manor. I don't know. It's just, for me, what does it say about Manor? And I know the answer. But it's just, for me, when you're in that level, you still want to act and believe like you're going to one day become a big team if you're a small team. You just go back to Manor as what? The new Minardi, maybe? Minardi back then never would have done that. They owned their own driver. They had their pride. They had a certain amount of ego on the track. And yeah, they were last, but they were trying to be last their way. So, a lot of things have changed.
And talking about ego on the track, did you see who did the interviews on the podium after the race was over? Mark Webber, and he did a shoey with Daniel Ricciardo.
That was
I guess this is going to be a thing now. Every time that Ricciardo gets on the podium, somebody's going to be doing a shoey.
Because for him, when Ricciardo's second, he has to say, "I beat one Mercedes today." So for him, it's like a victory. And because he might not go on the top 7 of the podium this year, he's got to take every chance he gets to drink that champagne off his shoes.
Well, it was funny because when he did that, he held up his shoe. I think Weber said something to the effect, I'm not going to drink out of that. And then eventually it did, much to the amusement. I think to the amusement of everybody. It was quite a funny moment. But I wonder, just now talking about Ricciardo on P2 on the second step of the podium there, I wonder if Verstappen had kept his nose clean, how that would have turned out, because obviously Ricciardo had a bit of a dry patch there several races ago.
And we're not referring to off-track problems for Verstappen here. That's not the case. That's not why Mark says keep his nose clean. He's literally trying to keep the nose of the car clean. Yeah. Just want to make sure that we're not talking about problems other drivers had in the past.
Yeah, exactly. No, if he kept his nose clean on the track and hadn't had that collision with the Ferraris, I really wonder how that would have played out. Would we have seen the two Red Bulls racing for it and fighting for maybe P2 or somewhere else on the track? So, of course, we'll never know. But I'm sure that Daniel Ricciardo is obviously very happy to get to P2 because he was in a bit of a dark spot there, I think, for several races, because he lost that race in Spain, which was Verstappen's first F1 win, because he had that puncture right in the closing stages of the race. Then they went to Monaco a couple of weeks after that, and they blew his pit stop when he went into the pits, and there were no tires waiting there for him. So he had some tough results there, but obviously the last couple of races have gone a little bit better for him. So we'll wait and see. I think that this weekend coming up at Italy at Monza is a power track, and I think that that's going to favor the faster cars. And I think that Ferrari, obviously racing on their home track, they're going to have another 15 or 20 horsepower to work with just from the boost from the Tifosi that will make their ways in their tens of thousands to watch at Monza.
You know what it is? It's just the risk factor. They're willing to push that car just a little bit much, maybe even pushing the risk to the car blowing up or a mechanical problem arises, just to show their fans that are at least trying to bridge that gap to Red Bull. Because yes, Ferrari is third now in the pecking order. McLaren is Mercedes, it's Red Bull, and then it's Ferrari. And they need to bridge that gap, and what better place to start than on Italian soil?
And yeah, of course, and that's where they have to perform. And I don't know about you, but I think one of the great starts in Formula One has to be at Monza, where they have that long straightaway where they all go down and the track is fairly narrow and they go into that chicane at the Rettifilio, and there's always something that happens there. Somebody goes straight on through the little runoff area that they have there. Somebody loses a wing and they all come out on the other side. But I think that's one of the great starts, one of the great sections of track in all of Formula One, especially once they get going and they come around through the famous Parabolica and down that long straightaway. Do you remember, oh gosh, this is a long time ago now. Do you remember it must be about 15 years ago. It was Christian Fittipaldi and his teammate, and we were talking earlier about going wheel to wheel and some of the accidents that they can cause. He tried to pull out and pass his teammate and hit the wheel and flipped over right on the straightaway, right in front of the pits there, and landed the right way up. That was incredible. But Monza is one of the classic tracks, and this is the last year on the current deal that they've been there every year since 1950, and there was some talk earlier in the year that they might not go back. There was some talk that there might be a Grand Prix coming for Vegas, which would be, I think, somewhat. I think Formula One would probably work in Vegas, depending how they do the circuits. But
it won't be a circuit to be a circuit. It'll be a circus to be a circuit to be a circus. So I'm not going to necessarily agree with it. Nice place in Austin they built for Grand Prix, and I guess it's not good enough for them, right?
Yeah, I like the Circuit of the Americas. But what I was going to say is that they have been talking about renewing the contract with Monza. So Bernie Ecclestone said a couple of days ago that he would be very surprised if they don't get a deal done for 2017 and beyond. And well, I mean, seriously, think about it. Monza is one of those tracks that I just could not picture Formula One without an Italian Grand Prix an Italian Grand Prix at Monza. I cannot conceive that.
They'll be back for sure. Bernie Ecclestone's not going to be there forever. Like, there was other talks this week of people trying to get together to buy F1 off Ecclestone. So, that's going to happen before F1 doesn't go to Monza, hopefully. Because, like you mentioned, it's a great straightaway. It's a great Grand Prix. It's a classic track. And I mentioned it straightaway in first chicane. Max, I'll give you a little advice right now, Mr. Verstappen. Don't crash in the first chicane, please. Just keep your car in good shape so the entire race can give us a show worthy of maybe a place on the podium and not trying to fight for a top 10. Because if your car is in a good position after the first turn, you're going to have more chance than if you crash on the first turn.
Exactly. When you think that there's going to be about 50 or 55 laps around Monza this weekend, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to pass. So, I think obviously we're going to have to consider that it's going to be business as usual, and there will be a silver Mercedes out there at the front. But you never know with Ferrari. There's a lot of pride there, and they want to turn their season around to some extent. And even though I know a lot of the teams may be looking towards 2017 and all the development, obviously Ferrari wants to make sure that they're at least going to have an impressive outing, a good outing in front of their own fans.
Exactly. I wouldn't be surprised to see a Ferrari back on the podium this time around.
Well, I think they need it because their season went sideways pretty much after the first couple of races. And even though that they are still, third in the Constructors' Championships, I don't think that's very impressive by their standards. But it's also interesting to see that Force India is now in fourth place ahead of Williams. And Williams has really dropped off. And again, this past weekend in Belgium, we had both Force Indias in fourth and fifth place, which I think they've been quite impressive because they said it was sometime before the summer break there that they're basically going to put all their resources into developing the car for 2017, and there wasn't going to be too much more development on the current car because, of course, next year is a brand new formula, brand new cars, and so there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but they've been doing some good things there, and Williams, I think, have their work cut out for them to try and get that third place back in the Constructors for them. And I don't know what we've seen from them over the last couple of races. I would think that unless something goes really wrong at Force India, that it doesn't seem likely that Williams will overtake them anytime soon. I mean, there's only a couple of points between them in the Constructors' Championship, but Force India just seems to have it together at the moment, and Williams seems to be struggling a little bit.
Exactly. And just before we wrap the show, Mark, I just want to let our listeners know that F1 2016, the new PS4 and Xbox One game, is out for the last 2 weeks. And if you have an extra copy, or if you want me to review it, I need your help to review it. So send your favorite copy of F1 2016 to sportspodcastingnetwork@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to contribute to our Patreon to help us review this video game, sportspodcastingnetwork.com. Just go to patreon.com. That's patreon.com/sportspodcastingnetwork.
Very cool. And what else is going on the network nowadays, Kevin?
Right now, we are back to Soccer Today Live, Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific for all the soccer fans. Weekly show, Sports West Score, the Sports News Quiz, 2 up front every Friday. We have as well Off the Woodworks post game after the Montreal Impact, and a lot of brand new shows coming up the next few weeks on the network.
Very cool. And just to remind everybody where they can find you online and where they can find the Sports Podcasting Network on Twitter and social media.
At SportsPodNet, and my personal account on Twitter, it's at Kev Laramee. You can subscribe to our Facebook page, so facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. We have live videos, live shows as well on our Facebook page, so give us a like and you can stay up to date to all the content that we produce here.
Very cool. And of course, if you want to follow this show, you can follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod, and you can get all the latest news from our side of our Canadian perspective on Formula One. So that's the place to do it. And anyways, that is a wrap for episode 16. We will be back just in a couple of days after the Italian Grand Prix in Monza. So until then, take it easy and have a great F1.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.